welcome back to Mac's Garage. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, if you like what you see today, go ahead and do that. Today I'm going to be working on this 92 Dodge W250 with the Cummins turbo diesel in it. And what this needs is a transmission. So several years ago I put a NV5600 6-speed manual transmission in it. This truck was originally a 5-speed truck, so it was a manual transmission, which made this a little easier to do. But I put a 6-speed in here, and a couple years ago now, I smoked the clutch in it, basically, is what I did. And when it came time to actually change that clutch, I found some transmission issues, so I swapped that out. And as I start to tell this, it turns out this is actually a pretty long story, but I'll try to keep it fairly brief. So I bought this truck. It had a 5-speed transmission. The Dana 70 rear end one day while I was driving down the road decided that it did not want to be as one cohesive unit anymore. It split into a bunch of pieces. When it did that, the shafts in the transmission kind of, well, the rear end locked going 60 miles an hour with the cruise set. So the engine stopped, like right now. It had a bunch of weight from the engine on one side and the transmission stopped it on the other. Wait a minute. No. The engine was spinning at whatever 60 mile an hour was. The rear end went to 0. The transmission was in the middle there. It broke. So I'm not sure exactly what really happened inside of it. It still kind of worked. I didn't have second gear, I think. One of the gears wasn't there. You could still kind of drive it, you just had to skip that one. But anyway, I was going to rebuild that 5-speed, but it was kind of a weak unit anyway. I took it apart. I don't remember what the story was, but I decided to just go ahead and upgrade at that point. I upgraded to an NV5600. Well, I bought a used NV5600 that was all grimy and nasty like Cummins trucks generally are. What did it come with? It came with the engine plate, flywheel, transmission, and I guess that's it. It's been a long time. I think that's what I remember. Long story short, I got that one home. It was greasy and grimy. I started pressure washing it off to clean it up and paint it before I put it in so it's nice and fresh inside the truck. As I did that, I realized that part of that nasty griminess on the bottom was this huge puddle of JB Weld. Awesome. So I pulled the PTO covers off both sides. I looked inside of there. You could see where the case was clearly grenaded. Also through that I could see one gear, and I'm not sure what gear it is. I think it's 6th gear. But one of the gears I could see on the counter shaft through the PTO sprocket, or through the PTO cover, several teeth were missing. Chunked, nasty, whatever. So that was a transmission I didn't overly want to put in the truck. Back at that point, NV5600s were still, it was probably like the cheapest time you could possibly buy an NV5600. The trucks that they were coming out of were just old enough that if they got wrecked, they might get parted out, and there wasn't really a big demand for them yet. So I bought the first NV5600, turned out to be junk. Rather than getting it fixed at that point, which it needed a case, it needed gears, I don't know. So I went ahead and just bought another NV5600, which I then bolted in the truck and went. And that transmission stayed in this truck for quite a while. Eventually I smoked the clutch in it. It got to the point where it still drove around fine, but if you had it weighted down pretty good, if you gave it some good heavy right foot and had a trailer on behind it, it started to slip. So then I went to put the new clutch in, and that's when I figured out that the transmission I had problems. And I'll show you the box of parts that came out of that in a second. But the long story short is I never got rid of that first junk NV5600, and it's currently in the truck. So if you watched my video where I picked this up without a backup plan and drove it across the Mackinac Bridge and wondered, well, why'd that seem like a big deal? That transmission, in my mind, is kind of a grenade with the pin pulled. I don't really know that for sure. Maybe it'll run for like 100,000 miles. But the transmission is definitely a real questionable piece. Because it's a real questionable piece, I just dumped fluid in it, because I put it in here literally just to move it on and off of trailers, in and out of the shop, or in and out of the storage space that it was in, and in and out of the shop. Obviously, I ended up driving it. Wasn't really planning on doing that, but I wrecked my other truck, so I didn't really have a lot of other options. I could have figured something out, but I just drove it. I went for it, and it worked. So now I'm finally to the point where I'm going to put that NV5600, the rebuilt one, which I was going to do myself, at least my mind said that, but after like a year and a half of not doing it myself, I took it to a shop, which also took like 6 months to do it, but at least it got done eventually. So now I'm ready to put the transmission back in, get this truck back on the road, and yeah, figure out what else doesn't work on it and what else needs work after sitting for 2 years. So, show you that box of parts. Alright, so along with a couple of rotors I wanted to make a video on at some point. I've also got this box of old parts. So the main reason, and you can't even see it, I guarantee you can't, because it needs a straight edge and basically a light. So the main reason that this got rebuilt is this unit right here. This is the input shaft. So the clutch splines onto this, the engine sits right here, and the rest of the transmission basically comes off the back of this unit here. Now the problem is it's twisted. So this is the bigger shaft. I think it's a 1 3/8, but I'd have to look that up to be sure. But this is the bigger shaft NV5600, and you can't see it, but there is enough of a twist in these splines that a clutch disc does not ride on them. So that was the real part that that caused this whole unit to be gone through. This is 6th gear, I think, which they got it labeled here. Here, it's cracked. So it's cracked. Yep, look at that. That tooth is cracked. So we replaced that as well. This one, I don't know what gear this is. Maybe reverse? I think this was reverse. I don't really... I don't know what was wrong with this one. But anyway, that's another gear that got replaced. All the bearings, another big deal there was the synchronizers. Those were all bad, so they've been replaced, and yeah, and there's the trans. And now it's been a month since I filmed the first couple sections of that video, and I'm finally ready to actually do this transmission. In fact, I already started taking stuff apart, so I can't just push this outside to do other work. But in the meantime, I'm going to break this down into more videos that I thought it took longer to tell this story than it probably should have. I will make a video that's probably just kind of a time lapse. It's not going to be a step-by-step guide, but I'll do like a time lapse of pulling this transmission. My goal is to get the drive shafts and transfer case out before I leave today, and then I'm real committed to actually doing this. Thanks for watching. If you made it to this point, then you must be interested, so you should hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you later.